In a recent heated parliamentary session, the opposition leader brought severe charges against the Prime Minister, saying that he was fake and deceitful in his behavior. The Speaker, respecting the opposition leader's extensive term and experience in Parliament, reminded him that such words aimed at an individual were not parliamentary. He invited the opposition leader to proceed with his question, underlying the importance of etiquette in the House.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition is a very experienced member of Parliament, and I know that he would understand that kind of a statement that directed to an individual would not be considered.
Undeterred, the opposition leader persisted, continuing his accusation that the Prime Minister was disingenuous and deceitful on this topic, as he supposedly was on many others. He cited a particularly controversial move taken by the Prime Minister, who permitted the export of gas turbines to pump gas from Putin's economy to Europe. The opposition leader contended that this action essentially subsidized the continuing conflict, portraying the Prime Minister as siding with Russian interests over Ukraine.
Export of gas turbines to pump gas from Putin's economy into Europe to fund the war. He's someone who signed up.
The Speaker interjected again, pointing out that given his expertise, the opposition leader should know better than to use language that is considered unparliamentary. He requested that he amend or remove his statements and restate his inquiry without using such incendiary language.
A very experienced member, and he knows that when the Speaker asks him to chastise us a little bit for the use of language which is not considered parliamentary, I'd ask him please to rephrase, withdraw those comments, rephrase the question without
shifting his emphasis somewhat while remaining critical. The opposition leader accused the Prime Minister of more wrongdoing. He said that the Prime Minister has enabled Russian detonators to be used against Ukrainian soldiers on the battlefield as part of a pro-Russian energy strategy that offered financial assistance to Russia. This, he said, was a betrayal of not just Ukraine, but also of Canadian beliefs and people.
Someone who signed on to allow Russian detonators to blow up Ukrainians on the battlefield, and he's a pro-Russia energy policy to fund the Russian economy. We'll take no less.
As the opposition leader spoke, his followers applauded, emphasizing the debate's divisiveness and high stakes. He provided a bleak picture of the Prime Minister's activities, claiming they were not only wrong, but also fundamentally detrimental to both foreign and domestic interests. In response to criticism from the opposition, the Right Honourable Prime Minister took the floor. He accused the opposition leader of seeking to deflect from the reality that Conservative MPs voted against President Zelensky's proposal for Canada to support a free trade agreement with Ukraine. The Prime Minister claimed that this vote was a blatant betrayal of the Ukrainian people, emphasizing the opposition's inconsistencies in Ukraine's support.
From the fact that his members voted against a request by President Zelensky himself to support a Canada-Ukraine free trade deal. The reality is his constituents across the country feel betrayed by the Conservative Party voting against Ukraine.
The opposition leader refused to back down, claiming that Ukrainians had expressly requested missiles with conservative backing rather than turbines and detonators, as the Prime Minister had done. He charged the Prime Minister with failing both Ukrainians overseas and Canadians at home. He claimed that Canadians are kind and decent people who shouldn't have to suffer the loss of fundamental needs, such as inexpensive food and shelter as a result of one man's ineptitude and vanity. He proposed a carbon tax election, arguing that it would empower Canadians to influence the course of their country's policies and leadership.
For us to give missiles that Conservatives support to Ukraine, not to give turbines and detonators to Russia, which is what he has done. He has failed Ukrainians abroad, and he's failed Canadians at home. Canadians are good and decent people. They don't have to live this way. They do not have to give up the things they used to take for granted, like affordable food and homes, all for the incompetence and ego of one man. He is not worth the cost.
The Prime Minister reacted by emphasizing the opposition leader's need to explain their vote against Ukraine. He pointed out that the opposition leader had stopped citing the environmental tax that Ukraine had adopted years ago, which had previously been used to justify their position. Instead, he said, The opposition was seeking to disguise their genuine conduct by twisting the narrative.
Speaker, notice how desperate he is to try and find any excuse he can to justify their voting against Ukraine. Suddenly, he's not talking about the price on pollution that Ukraine put in itself years ago. He's not using that as an excuse, even though that was all we heard.
In another tense session in Parliament, mayhem broke out when Pierre Poilievre challenged Prime Minister Justin Trudeau about the alarming increase in car thefts. Poilievre fiercely accused Trudeau of failing to address the widespread spike in auto thefts, alleging the Prime Minister was suddenly presenting himself as a hero on the issue despite thefts doubling in Toronto and growing by 100% in Montreal during his tenure. Poilievre chastised Trudeau for enacting policies such as catch and release and house arrest for auto thieves, as well as enabling ports to serve as hubs for exporting stolen vehicles for international criminal networks. Poilievre advised that instead of conducting additional talks, Trudeau reconsidered his unsuccessful policies and took actual steps.
On auto theft, but it's actually tripled in Toronto, and it's up by 100% in Montreal after he brought in catch and release and house arrest for car thieves, and after his incompetence allowed our ports to spin out of control and our cars to be exported to overseas crime and terror networks.
The Prime Minister replied by recognizing the gravity of the issue and accused the Conservative leader of using hollow platitudes and blame tactics. Trudeau said that his administration is actively engaging with stakeholders and leaders of all levels of government to solve the problem. He noted that the Canada Border Services Agency seized more than 1,600 stolen vehicles in 2023. He also said that the government will continue to invest in measures to keep Canadians safe and decrease crime, stressing the necessity of working together to address the issue completely.
And the Conservative leader just chooses to whip out his empty slogans and continue to blame everyone while we're getting to work. We're pulling together stakeholders and leaders from across the government to look at what more we can do. We've seen successes. CBSA agents have intercepted over.
Poilievre responded by noting that violent crime has increased by 40% during Trudeau's leadership. He criticized the government's approach to summits as unproductive and without substance. According to Poilievre, a news release from 2022 said that roughly 9,600 automobiles were stolen in the Toronto region alone, a 300% rise from 2015. He questioned what had changed in 2015, jokingly blaming Trudeau's programs for the increase in crime. He also said that Trudeau's government needs to enact meaningful measures exacerbating the issue at hand.
It's way up. Violent crime is up 40% under this Prime Minister. And today he had his ministers hold a big press conference as their solution. And in it, they put out a press release that said, and I quote, "In 2022, approximately 9,600 vehicles were stolen in the Toronto area alone, representing a 300% increase since 2015.
Trudeau reacted by noting that the Conservative administration under Stephen Harper cut money for police, CBSA personnel, and Veterans Affairs programs in 2015, which the Liberal government had to remedy when it took office. He stressed that his government had reduced taxes for the top 1%, decreased taxes for the middle class, helped families, and pushed gun control legislation. Trudeau chastised the Conservatives for their links to American gun lobbyists and reaffirmed his commitment to keeping Canadians safe by prohibiting the return of assault weapons to the streets.
15, end quote. What happened in 2015?
What happened?
I know, he happened, Mr. Speaker. How can we make him unhappen and stop the crime?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, in 2015, Stephen Harper presented a budget.
Poilievre criticized Trudeau's use of summits, accusing him of losing control and questioning their effectiveness in tackling problems like food prices and housing expenses, as well as lowering crime. He said that the Prime Minister's track record demonstrated a pattern of ineffectual government and that his programs needed to produce meaningful outcomes for Canadians.
Is he ever losing control of himself? Oh my goodness. Screaming and hollering like that. Mr. Speaker, it's his press release that says that in Toronto, auto thefts are up 300% since he took office. His solution is to hold a summit. He held a summit on food prices. Food prices went up. He held a summit on housing.
The Prime Minister defended his approach, claiming that his administration provided facts in news releases, something the Harper government didn't do. He emphasized the significance of rolling up their sleeves and working with partners around the nation to address the problem of vehicle theft. The Prime Minister contrasted his administration's proactive efforts with Poilievre's political assault campaign that failed to deliver actual answers. He highlighted his government's accomplishments, such as CBSA investigators intercepting stolen automobiles, and underscored the need for continuing efforts to address the fundamental causes of crime.
Did for years. Yes, Mr. Speaker, there is a real challenge around auto theft in this country, and our solution is to roll up our sleeves, pull together partners from across the country, and get to solving it. His solution: throw his hands up in the air, blame a raft of political attacks on us, and continue.
The discussion emphasized the huge disparities in the two leaders' approaches to government and crime prevention. Poilievre focused on criticizing the government's perceived mistakes and demanding quick action, while Trudeau stressed a more collaborative and deliberate approach to resolving complicated challenges. The conversation highlighted the greater political difference between the Conservative and Liberal parties, as each leader appealed to their supporters and presented their aspirations for Canada's future.
Putting forward any real solutions, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister's commitment to collaborating with stakeholders and investing in crime prevention measures indicates a long-term approach to tackling the underlying challenges that are driving an increase in vehicle theft and violent crime. His administration's emphasis on facts and collaboration indicates confidence in complete solutions involving several levels of government and community partners.
Real ways, while the Conservatives cozy up to the American gun lobbies, we've continued to step up.
Poilievre's focus on the government's perceived mistakes, as well as his desire for prompt action, conveys a feeling of urgency and responsibility. His views appeal to individuals who are dissatisfied with the existing state of crime and want immediate and decisive action to solve it. Poilievre's goal in spotlighting the rise in vehicle theft and violent crime is to depict Trudeau's government as incompetent and disconnected from regular Canadians' concerns.
Housing costs doubled. How much is crime going to rise after all the bigwigs go to his summit?
Finally, the argument between Poilievre and Trudeau emphasizes the difficulties of resolving such concerns within the confines of political discourse, as well as the need for effective and evidence-based solutions. While Poilievre's appeals for urgent action demonstrate a feeling of urgency, Trudeau's focus on cooperation and long-term investment emphasizes the necessity of long-term, comprehensive solutions.
We'll keep Canadians safe.